Hello, this is Amy Lyons-Ketchum, and I'm back with Module 2, Lecture Part 3. This lecture is going to be about Creole languages, Pidgin languages, and mixed languages. So I would assume that many in the class have probably heard of a Creole language before, most famously being the Creole language of Louisiana, which is a mixture of French, indigenous languages, and African languages. There's also a Creole in Haiti. So sometimes it's called Haitian Creole. Sometimes it's called Haitian French Creole. It is also a mixture of indigenous languages, French, and African languages. Pidgins might be something you're not familiar with, and I'm pretty sure you haven't heard of mixed languages just because they are extremely rare, and we have one here in North America, so we'll talk about that. So here are some definitions so that we are clear on what a pidgin, a Creole, and a mixed language are. I also included the definition for a lingua franca. You may have heard this term before. So what is a pidgin? A pidgin is a grammatically simplified form of a language used to communicate between people not sharing a common language. Pidgins have a limited vocabulary. Some elements are which are taken from local languages and are not native languages. No one is born speaking a pidgin language, but they arise out of contact between speakers of other languages. So an example of a pidgin would be if a person who did not speak very much Spanish was trying to communicate with a person who spoke Spanish and very little English, and they use a mixture of English and what Spanish they know in a very simplified way to try to communicate something. And I have there's a video that I will link into the supplemental resources. That's a great example of a pidgin language. A Creole is a mother tongue, so people are born speaking a Creole, formed from the contact of two languages through an earlier pidgin stage. So when two groups come in contact and they have very different languages, this pidgin language forms so that they can communicate with each other. And over time, this simplified language becomes more complicated. It has its own vocabulary. It starts to borrow heavily on the syntax and grammar of one or both languages. It might borrow heavily the vocabulary from one or both languages and start to form its own vocabulary. And as people use this every day and it becomes the language of their household, and then their children are raised in this language, it becomes a Creole. A mixed language is a language that arises from a bilingual group combining aspects of two or more languages, but not clearly deriving primarily from one single language. So what does this mean? Say that you have a group of people that speak language A and a group of people that speak language B. They're both bilingual. Both groups of people speak both languages, and they have together formed a new language that uses aspects of both languages. It's not simplified like a pidgin, but it is a very complex system, and I'll show you an example here later on in the presentation. And then just for context, a lingua franca is a language that is adopted as a common language between speakers whose native languages are different. So a pidgin, simplified language, two or more languages. There's always a dominant, the superstrate language, that provides most of the vocabulary and grammar. So in the example I gave of a person who speaks English and very little Spanish trying to communicate with a person who speaks Spanish and very little English, for me, the English would be the dominant, the superstrate language, and then Spanish would be the less dominant or the substrate language that provides additional vocabulary. So you can imagine the English speaker using English grammar and mostly English conventions, verbs, vocabulary, and throwing in some Spanish vocabulary here and there. So here's an example from Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is an island nation that has a lot of linguistic diversity. And so if you look at the example here, you might see some words that seem kind of familiar through English. Like I see plenty and peanut, and strong, phantom. And so this kind of goes on from here, and it has the translation: if you eat plenty of peanuts, you will come up strong like the phantom. And then there is a YouTube video that you can click on this link and see an example of a pidgin language. So in the 19th century, when slaves from Africa were brought over to North America to work on plantations, they were separated from people of their community and mixed with people of various other communities. They were not easily able to communicate with each other. And there was a strategy behind this. It was harder for them to band together. It was harder for them to plot escape. And so in order to communicate with their peers on the plantations and with their bosses, they needed to form a language in which they could all communicate. And this is where some pidgins came from. So many pidgins come from colonization because one group takes over and starts communicating in a different language, and the people, the inhabitants, have to be able to communicate in some way with those people. Prominent languages such as French, Spanish, Portuguese, English, and Dutch were languages of colonizers, and they're all pidgins that use these languages, and Creoles. Okay, so talking about Creoles, with use over time, a pidgin may evolve into a more complex language with complex grammar and unique vocabulary. Once a pidgin has developed native speakers, so people who are born speaking that language, it has now become a Creole. French, Native American, and African languages were mixed and developed into Louisiana Creole, which some people call Cajun. Haitian Creole is a mixture of French and African languages. Hawaiian Creole is Native Hawaiian and English. And it is often described as a pidgin. However, people in Hawaii say that no, it's a Creole. We are born and understand this language and speak it in our homes. Creoles are often seen as inferior forms of a dominant language. And so here I have some links that show examples of Creoles. I highly recommend you click on these YouTube links and watch these videos. And so now we get to mixed languages. And again, they are very rare. There are very few mixed languages in the world, actual mixed languages. And it is exactly what it says. It's an actual mixing of two languages by bilingual people. Both groups speak both languages, and together they found a way to combine them. So here in North America, there's a mixed language called Michif. Michif is a Native American language that is the mixing of French and Cree, the Cree language. So how does it mix? So everything that has to do with nouns and noun phrases are all in French. So you would use French articles like the and an. You would use French adjectives because adjectives describe nouns, and all the nouns would be in French, and they would follow the French convention of noun first, adjective second, which is different than what we do here in English. But in Michif, all the verbs and verb phrases are all in Cree. So that means all the suffixes and prefixes that are part of the verb, all the postpositions and things like that, which are the complex morphology of verbs in Cree, are all in Cree. And then conjunctions, things like and, but, or, these are mixed. They almost 50-50. It says 60-40 Cree and French. So question words are in Cree. Personal pronouns are in Cree. We have nouns in French and pronouns in Cree. Prepositions are in French, but they also use Cree postpositions, and numbers are in French. So if you can imagine a language where the first half of the sentence is in French and the second half is in Cree, this is what Michif would be. I have a link so you can watch someone speaking Michif. It's a very endangered language. And I really think what's interesting is In French, the most complicated part of a sentence in French would be the noun phrase. And in Cree, the most complicated part of a sentence would be the verb phrase. So the people who created Michif didn't take the easy route. They picked the hardest part to make French and the hardest part to make Cree, to make their language. So here are some written examples of the Lord's Prayer in English, French, and Michif. And so you can see different things that correlate. And then some more examples, Mobilian jargon you might have heard of. I have a video in the supplemental resources about Mobilian. Mobilian is a pidgin that was used in the southeastern United States, and it's based on Muskogean languages, but it's not a dialect of these languages. It's a simplified version of Muskogean languages with other languages thrown in. It was used as a lingua franca, a common language. It's first mentioned by Europeans in 1699. It was also called Yama, and it was used a lot at intertribal gatherings. It was used between Europeans and guides and missionaries, or intertribal or interracial marriages, trade, explorations, etc. So people of the Southeast didn't have to know every single language, no Choctaw, no Chickasaw, no Creek, no Seminole, but they were able to communicate with each other in Mobilian and communicate with outsiders in Mobilian as well. There's no evidence that Mobilian was ever Creolized, that it became the first language of a group of people. It was used actively through the 1940s and 50s, and there are still examples of it. And I have an example here and an example in our supplemental resources. So thank you very much for joining me for Module 2, Lecture Part 3 on Creoles, Pidgins, and Mixed Languages. And I will see you at the next video.